Reserve Lieutenant General Alexei Savin went from cadet to head of the General Staff Department. The combatant has awards. Firm 1989 to 2004 year, commander of the legendary military unit 10003, head of the Brain Wars program. In an exclusive interview, he told us an incredible story. According to General Savin, in 1989 year, he was given an unusual task. An order was received from the General Staff to create a group of psychics who could receive intelligence information by penetrating the minds of Pentagon employees. This task at that time no longer seemed fantastic. The heads of the military department had information that the Americans had similar employees in their states. We had information about jobs in the United States of America. We have already developed these works into state programs for the use of people with extraordinary abilities. In the interests of public administration, in the interests of intelligence, in the interests of military affairs, and so on. They determined the structure and composition of our polygons. They determined the characteristics and stages of the creation of our strategic carriers. They determined the characteristics of people. According to General Savin, his group managed to achieve some success in this area. The program was completely classified. Only a narrow circle of leaders of the Ministry of Defense and the government knew about it. Therefore, today Alexei Yuryevich has no right to disclose details. Telepathic contact, according to the band members, took place as follows. Contact in a special state of consciousness. Telepathically asked questions and recorded answers by automatic writing. During the experiment, the psychic officers were asked, among other things, questions to which the examiners knew the answer. According to the officers, the reliability of the information received was 100%. One day the unexpected happened. According to the head of Military Unit B, during the next session of telepathic intelligence, officers reported that they hear the voice of an alien mind. Commander Savin requested permission to continue this work at the very top. It was received. We got the opportunity to get in touch with other civilizations. We received communication codes. We got the opportunity to have information about the way of government, about the education systems that were on those planets. Today, for the first time, we can introduce you to one of the members of this classified group. Valentina Sidorova got into a group of combat psychics from the KGB, where she worked at that time. She passed a serious selection, and subsequently, according to her, turned out to be exactly the person who made the first contact.
At the beginning of the contact, of course, there was some kind of concern, but it's not really. This is understandable. And then pretty quickly, I got into some kind of friendly tone with them. We talked calmly for quite a long time, about 2.5 years.
The narrators claim that they received a list of questions from the leadership of the Ministry of Defense and the government, and tried to telepathically ask them to representatives of another mind.
There was contact with aliens. That was 25 years ago. We were given a code with which we, using it, received information on certain questions posed.
According to the officers, it was a huge amount of work. The written sheets were immediately taken away by a special courier to Moscow.
We wrote 50, 60, 80 notebooks each. Well, imagine, information was received at the highest speed. If only I remembered all this. Only I will finish about medicine of the 21st, 22nd century. There's another topic right there, and imagine one topic I remember. The second topic I'm here, the third. We wrote off whole Talmudic information, which was then handed over to the General Staff for development, testing.
The participants of the experiment do not know where these notebooks turned out to be later. Either these materials are still classified as top secret, or they disappeared without a trace after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Those with whom the officers of Unit 10003 communicated told about their civilization. They wrote about the nature of their planet, the state and social structure.
They don't give birth to children there, that civilization. At least, those aliens we talked to, they just order them in laboratories. It is normal for them to order a child with certain traits, characters that they would like to see in him, with a certain intellectual base, with a certain appearance.
For several months, these contacts were only telepathic. But one day, says General Savin, mysterious interlocutors offered a personal meeting. They liked the conversations with our operators. They invited two of them to their ship. According to the participants of this operation, the meeting with the aliens was supposed to take place in an ordinary forest near Moscow. Invisible interlocutors appointed a day and a place, and stipulated the conditions: no photo or video shooting. On the appointed day, the group gathered at the specified point. Two female officers selected for contact at some point informed the others that they were expected. They went into the forest, as agreed, unaccompanied, and came out into a certain clearing. There really was something that looked like a spaceship. They took them into the ship, showed them the structure of the ship, and so on. They suggested it themselves, so they chose two women who did not understand anything about technology. That's why maybe they chose it. They hardly described, remembered after that, what they saw, how. But the female officers remembered the interlocutors well. They looked like people, but they had two regular facial features and monotonous literate speech. Those entities that our women met, they were like us. We got the impression that they know how to change their appearance. Such transformers are peculiar. A little cold eyes, a little hidden emotions, to correct speech, very correct and precise gestures. That's what gave them away, well, as it were, in others that are not ours, not the Earth, but in others some very much. See below. Who leaves footprints at the scene of the appearance of UFOs. It's like a really heavy saucer, and a heavy ship has landed there. How do psychics find criminals?
I sense danger.
Vanga's predictions began to come true. The events in Europe, which the great clairvoyant warned about, are taking place before our eyes. Someday you will find out the whole truth, and it will shock you.
Millions of people will be wiped off the face of the earth.
Is the time of the last prophecy of the Bulgarian seer coming soon? The whole truth about the bank. She literally came back from the other world. Vanga, continue to zero. Tomorrow. This meeting was the first and only one, but telepathic communication continued. The aliens were more and more willing to make contact, but Valentina Sidorova was forced to stop this work. She felt a threat to her own safety.
I realized that there was already a deep interest in my personality, and I had the idea that they wanted to take me away. That's why I actually stopped this conversation. We haven't talked about it, but I suppose if they want to do it, they don't ask, by and large. Is it interesting for you to be with us or not? Can we pick you up?
As General Savin recalls, the information that the officers of the secret group received about the other mind was very diverse. That side willingly described the social structure and life of its own civilization, but flatly refused to share military technologies. And yet, the officers concluded that this civilization was significantly ahead of ours in technical terms. For them, there are no problems from the cosmic vacuum, or, more precisely, from the ether, here, to create, synthesize absolutely. Absolutely any things, starting from food, ending with some technological things. We started making fragments of instruments and instruments. The devices are mainly of a medical orientation. In one of the scientific and research institutes, we were convinced that, yes, this is really information. The information comes from representatives of other civilizations. From which planet were the aliens who communicated with military psychics, it remains unclear. The aliens chose to hide this information, but they reported that they have been present on Earth for a long time, and even have their own bases. They know how to stop in front of us and then instantly disappear. They obviously have some kind of technology in this regard. On the map of Moscow, they drew several points near Moscow where they are based or individual ships are standing. But if we talk about the Moscow region, it was easier for us to determine whether the information was accurate or not. As a rule, the grass was crushed or the bushes were somehow crushed there. Even the radius was tilted, as if in fact a heavy plate or a heavy ship sat down there. And crushed it not only grass, but also trees, but really did not break. According to General Savin, this work stopped with the collapse of the Soviet Union. A time of troubles has begun in the country. Unrest broke out in some regions. Military psychics were transferred to eliminate these problems, and they were not up to scientific experiments. They stopped contacting mysterious interlocutors. That the work of telepathic scouts. This is far from fiction, and not experiments with the subconscious, it is already known. Today there are whole divisions of psychics who help the police to search for criminals and missing persons. Irina Litvina, psychic search engine. Specialists like her are secretly connected when conventional methods turn out to be useless. According to Irina, information comes to her in the form of visual images. It doesn't sound like someone's voice from above at all.
I look at a photo of a person, and I get pictures of what happened to the person, whether he is alive or dead, and where he is at the moment.
Here is just one example. One day, Irina was asked to help find a 7-year-old girl who disappeared in Bashkiria. The stepfather of the girl came to the reception to Irina Litvina. He did not know that it was impossible to deceive a psychic. Detaining the criminal was a matter of technique.
Inexplicably, of course, what I felt, I sensed danger. I couldn't understand what I was afraid of. An ordinary person came in, sat down at the reception, crying that his daughter was missing. Yes, that is, she called him Dad. That's how I realized he was a murderer. Naturally, while he was driving home, we had already reported this to the police. The police met him at home near the train, near the carriage on, and immediately arrested.
At all times, there have been people who had other brain capabilities and successfully used them to get information about the hidden past and future. A number of outstanding scientists, starting with academician Vernadsky, have repeatedly expressed the theory that all information is stored in some giant database or information field of the planet. It has not yet been possible to obtain physical evidence of the existence of this field, but the theory has been summed up. It consists of waves, electromagnetic, radio waves, laser radiation, and many radiations emanating from a person. The totality of electromagnetic, all kinds of and other radiation. I'm not a physicist, I'm afraid to get lost. And it allows us to identify a specific person, to find him in this energy informational space of the Earth. The model of this space today is the Internet. You have pressed a few buttons on the keyboard. In front of you is Beethoven, Chaliapin, someone else, and even your classmate appears out of nowhere. There is an opinion that anyone can connect to the information field of the Earth or the universe. Sometimes this is called insight or intuition. Often dedicatedly use things that may have enhanced their abilities. A magic crystal ball, a reflection in the water. Most psychics usually need nothing but focus on the result. To do this, you need a lot of tension and attunement to the situation. Some feelings come. I have material on the Barnaul maniac in my desk. I drew his portrait. From the depths of consciousness, there is an image of what he is, what height, what he looks like. Doesn't have to look like it looks. What a face he has, the shape of his head. And I draw it, and we show it from the screen. He is being detained. The coincidence is absolute. Does this all-planetary internet have access to the intergalactic network? Is the Earth's information field connected to the entire universe? These are databases that store information coming from our civilization, from other civilizations, and information that accompanies the development of the universe as a whole. Her keepers are also responsible for her cosmic ones. These are entities that exist, invisible to our eyes, exist in space, and are responsible for certain areas, for certain trajectories of the development of the entire outer space. An international group of astronomers from the UK, Chile, Australia, and the USA announced a sensational discovery. At a distance of 12 light-years from Earth, 5 exoplanets have been discovered at once in the constellation of the Whale, around the star Tau. One of them is located in the Life Belt and can be inhabited. The star of Tau Ceti is very similar to the Sun. However, this planetary system is twice as old as the solar one. If a civilization originated there, it is much older than ours and, perhaps, more technically advanced. But how to check it? How to contact the brothers in mind? See below. Ancient civilizations had space communication technologies. He was beginning to see a holographic image between these two screens. Mysterious properties of crystal skulls. When the crystal brain finds its owner, it activates and activates consciousness. For half a century, it has been scanning the cosmos in search of signals of another mind. But no artificial-like noises have been recorded in the radio wave range so far. Scientists are puzzling over why this is so. This is such a big enough problem, well known. It's called the Fermi paradox. Even before the discovery of exoplanets, mathematics, the category of probabilities, suggested that there should be a lot of planets like Earth in space. Well, we are such a fairly ordinary planet in this sense. More than 800 exoplanets have been discovered in our galaxy alone. Life is possible on at least 10 of them. In addition, all of these systems are much older than the solar one. If they are inhabited, those civilizations must be superior to us in technology. Perhaps it is, reads researcher Valery Uvarov. He studied texts and archaeological finds of ancient civilizations. It describes the technologies of interplanetary communication, which were used on Earth thousands of years ago. They are much more perfect than radio exchange. And this is exactly what the officers of the military unit are talking about. In the form in which modern man implies the possibility of telepathic communication over long distances between two people, can only be characteristic of a very narrow or very narrow group of people. This is due to a very specific human genetics. With the most positive forecasts, I think that there will hardly be more than 3% of such people. For all other people who inhabit not only the Earth, and not only in our time and our space, it is wiser and more correct to use certain technical devices to interact with each other at different distances. According to the heritage of ancient Egypt and Mesoamerica, Valery Uvarov found a description of how it worked. The pharaoh or prince wore a special headdress, the crown of a tef. It is in them that Egyptian gods and kings are always depicted. Inside this diadem, just above the crown, there was a crystal. It was necessary to take some cylinders or wands of Horus in your hands and put on special sandals. A priest or a pharaoh entered the pyramid, for example, the pyramid of Cheops. Then we will talk about the pharaoh, then in that chamber. which we call as the Queen's Chamber, there was a certain table and 2 quartz crystals. They were so tilted, not even like crystals, these are quartz screens of a certain thickness. At a certain moment, a person who was inside this camera, with sandals, with this tiara on his head, with evil mountains in his hands, he began to see a holographic image between these 2 screens. According to the researcher, the session could be similar to 3-dimensional video communication or holographic communication. From the point of view of physics, this is not so impossible. In the pyramid itself, in addition to all that we have just discussed, there were now so-called crystals that were inserted from above, covering the so-called ventilation shafts. That's how all the ancient texts say these crystals were of extraterrestrial origin. That is, they were born, that is, their crystal structure was formed in the field of the planet with which communication was carried out. That is, roughly speaking, such a primitive way to set up the pyramid antenna to receive a signal from a specific planet. From the point of view of radioflectic, this is a very understandable move, in fact. Crystals are the most promising medium for storing and transmitting information today. They are actively used in the computer industry, but their properties have not been fully studied. We have every reason to think that the ancients did the same thing, because it is still unclear the purpose of 2000 lenses found in the Middle East, or there are still some crystal balls there. And it's one of the hardest minerals on Earth. Only diamond is harder, and how he was treated, in general, for scientists today. The mystery as to obtain a crystal ball, having indeed, that is of special tools. Recently, scientists from the University of Southampton have invented a hard disk that stores data in 5 dimensions of nanostructured quartz glass. A special high-frequency laser is used to record data. But perhaps such a medium of information has already been used on our planet in ancient times. One of the additional, absolutely curious tools that were used in the ancient world is the so-called crystal skulls. This, of course, is an extremely interesting thing. Crystal skulls are mysterious archaeological finds made mainly in North and South America. The artifacts have the shape of a human skull and are made of different quartz rocks. The sizes are different. Science considers these skulls to be objects of worship. However, none of the scientists can say what was done with them. American researcher Joshua Shapiro has been studying the phenomenon of crystal skulls for more than 30 years. He publishes the results of his research in his books and on his personal website on the internet. Several dozen skulls are known today. There are 4 types of skulls. Antique skulls that are more than 2,000 years old, those that are firm 1 to 2,000 years old, and new skulls, such as this one, about which it is impossible to say almost anything. They were not created on Earth. Some of the skulls are crude forgeries. But there are also some that are made using technologies that are unattainable even today. Their shape is perfect, and it is impossible to determine their age. There are only 7 such skulls in the world. 3 are kept in museums: the Smithsonian in Washington, the Paris Museum of Primitive Art, and the British Museum. 4 more are in private collections. Experts say that the Indians of North and South America, who kept these artifacts, could not have made such a thing. The Aborigines really believed in the extraterrestrial nature of these skulls. If you study the culture of different tribes and civilizations, you can establish that they had a connection with extraterrestrial life forms. And regardless of their origin, these crystal skulls were in contact with those civilizations. Not all skulls look like human ones. I have personally seen two such crystal skulls. The first one is called Edie. It is of extraterrestrial origin. And the second one is called Synergy. They are both considered very old, contain powerful energy, and do not look like a human skull. There is a possibility that the civilizations of the past had a connection with extraterrestrial life forms. They may even have been influenced by aliens. That is why we cannot create a copy of these skulls or recognize them, because they are of alien origin. Shapier himself has 6 skulls in his collection. He bought them from the heirs of the families who kept them. The researcher has carefully studied the skulls and is conducting experiments. According to him, the skulls, nothing but a communication device. However, this is a higher technology than is known today. It is associated with poorly understood brain abilities. It's impossible to really understand how the skulls turn on. To understand the actions of the crystal skull, you need to understand one thing that I really can't substantiate scientifically. When the crystal brain finds its owner, it activates and activates consciousness. According to Shapiro, a psychic is more likely to come into contact with the skulls. But it's hard to say who or what is on the other end of the wire. Oh, Mr. Premier, hello, how are you? But the researcher has no data yet that the crystal skull connects with someone specific. Rather, it looks like a computer with access to the intergalactic internet. Only not an open email or a program for short messages to a subscriber, but a search engine page. An important point is that if you put two such skulls side by side, they will begin to exchange information. One day, I had the feeling that I was seeing the side of a spaceship. And I had the feeling that extraterrestrial beings were sitting on their ship in the same way as we were between them. Just as this crystal skull lies between us. I think they use these items to communicate with humanity. Skulls can act in multiple dimensions at the same time. Researcher Valery Uvarov does not fully agree with this theory. He compared the translation of texts of ancient civilizations with what is written in occult books. In his opinion, the crystal skull allowed to contact only one subscriber. It's like a walkie-talkie tuned to a single frequency. Crystal artifacts have this shape for a reason. The masters needed to copy the anatomy and possibly the genetic code of the one who reported the information to the ancient priests. This is to make a very accurate cast of his skull and then make a complete, absolute crystal copy of this skull. And then the skull of this person, its internal structure. It entered into a certain energy informational interaction with this skull. But this is only one of the levels. Everything is actually much more complicated, because the skull itself has never been just on a rock somewhere out there in a random place. It has always been a temple. It has always been a room that, re-reflecting the signal, concentrated it on the skull. Always, such a skull had to be in place of the energy flow from the Earth, that is, on the geofracture. And a number of other very important elements allowed a person to include this object. Researchers Alexander and Svetlana Seversky came to a similar conclusion while studying crystal artifacts. The crystal may be part of a device for receiving and transmitting information, as custodians, as a kind of resonating structure. But he alone is not enough. That is, there must be something else. Moreover, I do not exclude that a person plays an important role in this, perhaps. In other words, he is part of this system. By itself, the crystal will not do anything. See below. Crystal skulls are the key to artificial intelligence. There is a specific being in this skull. Scientists suggest that pyramids are means of communication. Immediately, an analogy arises with a pyramid as a structured antenna. However, the Severskys went further in their research. Their theory looks fantastic at first glance. They believe that the ancient crystals contain a virtual copy of an intelligent being. The ancients were able to interact and immerse some subtle psychic structures into the crystal, maybe even the essence of a person or a soul, and store it there, and maybe even reproduce it. There is a certain being in this skull, which is enclosed there, which is really able to control certain events. Seversky believe that they have reason to believe so. The starting point for their research was the mysterious frescoes in Orthodox churches in the Balkans. They often depict saints or angels inside crystal balls. Sometimes they hold them in their hands. This led experts to believe that the paintings captured the memory of some ancient technology.
Suppose there is a mural on which there is a structure, on top of which there is a huge ball of rock crystal. Below, on the stand, there is a bowl, in which there is a small ball of rock crystal. Melchizedek holds exactly such a cup in the Parisian temple in his hands, and many researchers consider it a grail. What can we assume? But rock crystal had known optical properties, and they are now known, which were used in ancient technologies.
The researchers found arguments in favor of their theory in the city of Ohrid, Macedonia. This area is considered the cradle of Slavic writing and culture. Ohrid is even called Orthodox Jerusalem. Here is the Church of Saint Sophia. It was built in the 9th century. Its frescoes and architectural elements lead engineers and physicists to think about technical devices.
In the Church of Sophia Akritskaya, there is an analog, not self-arrangement, there is an analog, a cube, on which a pyramid is mounted on a metal rod. We believe that it is not by chance that such a small structure in the temple has been preserved until now, and it indicates that the pyramid, located on the rod, could rotate. During rotation, as is known, if a beam is directed at this pyramid, let's assume, or on the contrary, mechanically affected, we will get a reproduction of information.
According to sources, there is a crystal in the heart or at the top of any ancient pyramid. This makes sense only if it were not a cult object, but a receiving, transmitting, or recording device. It is not only in this temple, but also in the Ubisi temple, there are unique frescoes, where Christ is literally placed in the center of the crystal pyramid. On the sides, there are literally a device similar to locators, and with these types of lightning rods. And there is this lightning present in everything. In other words, it is as if we are talking about the transmission of an electrical signal. And it's not fantastic at all. This is what the internal structure of the pyramid looks like. When radio engineers are shown a drawing of the Egyptian pyramid of Cheops without saying what it is, they immediately recognize the scheme of a strange, but still familiar horn lens antenna. Immediately there is an analogy with a pyramid, like a horn antenna. This is the first thing that occurs to people who understand a little about radio engineering, acoustics. This is the first analogy that arises. In other words, the shape speaks about it, and the location of the internal elements. In other words, these are the focus points of energy. If we built a corpse like this, they make them. This is a horn antenna, and at these points there are receivers or emitters of energy. Physicist Andrei Verbitsky was simply amazed when he saw a detailed diagram of the Pyramid of Cheops. The drawing of a modern satellite dish looks almost the same. Modern ultra-high-frequency technology and that pyramidal construction technique structurally coincided. Waveguides, loops, details down to the smallest detail. However, as an antenna, the pyramid is arranged more competently. The pyramidal antenna works taking into account the Earth's magnetic field. This is especially important for deep space communications. The focus is inside and coincides with the place in the burial chamber, where there is a granite sarcophagus. There are 3 chambers in the Pyramid of Cheops. The upper one works for short distances, the middle one works for more distant ones. The lower ones work for intergalactic distances. In this focus, there is, well, an empty room, and the pyramid faces and energy concentrated by hundreds of square meters are concentrated on the ceiling of this burial so-called chamber, causing microvibration of the blocks. And in the camera in this appears. It is a resonator. So, as for the pyramid antenna of Cheops, and all the resonators are very precisely built, at a frequency of 438 Hz. Experts noticed a strange pattern. All the ancient pyramids stand on geological faults. In such places, excess electromagnetic energy of the Earth is released from the bowels, resulting from the rotation of the metal core. That is, the pyramid could use the energy flow of the planet. This place was, so to speak, a kind of portal, a space portal, through which this communication could be arranged. Moreover, it was also significantly strengthened by the fact that these pyramids are inscribed in a kind of, I would say, such a matrix like a chessboard. Each of the pyramids fixes a certain, let's say, zone on this chessboard, and together they combine this common space, like several, antennas into a kind of large antenna. Basically, all the ancient pyramids on the planet are located along the northern tropic or the 30th degree of north latitude, and exactly in increments of 18 degrees. Moreover, they are clearly oriented to the cardinal directions. From a technical point of view, it is necessary to position objects in this way only for one-purpose signal transmission. They could exchange information with each other, because the pyramids were both in Giza and in Mexico. And in principle, it could have been an exchange of information, because, strange as it may seem, but even in Hitler's time, there is evidence that with the help of crystal systems, the Tibetans brought him technology. When it came to exchanging video information, literally recordings, because these are some 40s when there were no video cameras yet. In other words, it is possible that this technology, it is still known and stored somewhere, and some wires are not needed for this. But that's not all. Calculations have shown that when the Earth rotates, the pyramids seem to hand over to each other the baton of continuous reception and transmission of a signal from space. It turns out that someone has built a single complex of connections on the planet. If we take, for example, the globe, then the pyramids are all located within the northern tropic. And the homing of the antennas allows, some pyramids have entered, while others have appeared. These came in, these appeared. This process is ongoing. Given that the other planet has the same axial rotation, we get a constant system of connections that does not work like ours. But it works great for them. See below, what do scientists think an alien mind might look like? Such a creature of civilization. The Earth has been under control for thousands of years. Both living entities and robots. You can call them cute robots. Here they are, this contract. Figured out that the Egyptian pyramids were designed to work with sound waves. Supporters of this version believe that a person lying in a sarcophagus could receive information in the form of images or sounds. Each type of this interaction has certain properties that can be guided by. I was trying to figure out whether these properties are applicable to pyramids or not, and by the method of exclusion, I came to the conclusion that in this case, the pyramids of Giza were operated with an acoustic wave. But how is this possible with an empty granite box? Engineers say it's all about the properties of the material. Granite, from which sarcophagi are made, is characterized by a high content of quartz, and this is still the same crystal. It is a modulating or demodulating device. Imagine that you can't send a low-frequency signal over long distances, but this signal needs a high frequency. The pyramid operates at ultra-high frequencies, at superfrequencies. But in order to bring a useful signal, a low-frequency signal was also loaded onto this ultra-high frequency. That is, our conversation, speech, a person or, let's say, God, heard what was being transmitted to him. But could everyone include a crystal skull or a pyramid? Is there a mechanism in our brain responsible for clairvoyance or telepathy? Scientists suggest that it may be the epiths or pineal gland, a small organ in the brain. It is known that it participates in the activity of the endocrine system, but its properties have not been fully studied. This organ is also called the third eye. Theoretically, it is he who can be responsible for intuition and foresight. Surprisingly, the ancients could have known about it. The eyes of the choir is called in Egypt. It enables a person to look exactly like these more subtle planes. And here's another interesting point, that we have a small amount of sand in the pineal gland. In other words, this fine, dispersed quartz sand, apparently, is somehow restructured inside the pyramid. Sand in the brain. At first glance, it sounds implausible. However, this is a recent discovery of physicians. Indeed, the epiphysis, dura mater, and vessels sometimes accumulate the smallest calcareous grains. At first, doctors considered them a symptom of senile changes, but then it turned out that these particles appear in a person, starting at the age of 8. In terms of composition, these are calcine crystals. Apparently, our brain and crystal technology are somehow connected after all. But so far, scientists do not fully understand this mechanism. If we assume that there is a civilization in the universe that has been developing for millions of years, then it could have reached an unthinkable level of development for us. It is possible that the form of life itself has changed over time. Some scientists call this new type of creature Mega sapiens. These are some structures that live on the same planet. Such a being is civilization. It can exist on a completely different level, not on the atomic, but on the subatomic. Candidate of philosophical sciences Vladimir Kishinets believes that all intelligent civilizations eventually reach a new level of development. He calls this state post-vital. This is what will come after biological life. And the reason will be the natural desire of all thinking beings not to die. First, scientists will look for different means to prolong the youth of life. Then a way will be found to change the genetic code so that these properties are inherited. But this is not the solution to the problem. Why? Because in any case, biological life is very weak. Well, what is it? We exist in a range of several tens of degrees where a person can live, despite the fact that the temperatures of the universe are measured in millions of degrees. And we live in a small bubble of air on Earth and are afraid, and really afraid, of any space catastrophe, climate change, and so on. And there is only one way out, to switch to non-biology, to other principles of existence. Such a civilization does not need devices that would scan the universe and send messages thousands of light years away. She has the fastest and most perfect means of communication thought. The thought is that she can say to the edge of the universe to drop by, right, and instant, and there were no obstacles in this. That's why it was interesting for us to communicate with everyone, realizing that our thought can get to where no telescope, of course, will reach. Mega Sapiens does not need any means of communication, power, and expensive resources. Such a civilization does not need huge territories. And this means that there is no need for it to scan space in search of habitable corners. For us, these beings are already gods, and who are we for them? Not necessarily at all. They are generally interested in us, and it is even more difficult to imagine why they would need to contact us at all. Think for yourself, a civilization that has been developing technically for millions of years. What interest do we represent to them? It's only in the movies where they are trying to conquer us and some of our resources. The Earth is a microscopic particle. It is a speck of dust, completely invisible on the scale of space. And hardly anyone needs our resources, and so on. Scientific theorists believe that any extraterrestrials, if they exist, can most likely be attributed to the level of megasapiens. In this case, it is clear that they will simply observe us without interfering with the development of our civilization. We are being watched in the same way as, for example, we are watching savages in Africa. It is quite possible that the aliens have just found this ancient civilization of some kind and are now watching us with delight. That's how interesting, you know. And to interfere in our life means everything, to disrupt our wild existence, to raise us to our level of civilization. However, if the encounters with omnipotent beings described in ancient texts are not a figment of fantasy, but evidence of real contacts, then in the past aliens have visited Earth more than once. They did not hide from people and did not hide their origin. But why do they avoid open visits today? It was simply easier to communicate with older civilizations. Because aliens arrived, they were automatically presented in the image of gods. People could not even demand or ask for technology from them. And it is clear that now, if someone comes to us, we will start demanding technology from them. We will start demanding all sorts of natural secrets, and so on and so forth. Give us the hyperspeed engines, give us this, that, the fifth, the 10th. Perhaps there is a certain threshold of intelligence of civilizations, or an age limit, by which intergalactic calls and visits are allowed. People have already come out of infancy, they have not yet entered the mind. And highly developed cultures are patiently waiting for this to happen. Perhaps they are watching so that we do not destroy ourselves. I think that each of the civilizations, developed civilizations, has already received some kind of sphere of responsibility, where it explores the processes taking place on some planet, maybe intervenes a little bit in current events, preventing, as it were, destruction, superdestruction on the part of an undeveloped civilization. Well, there should be information. Well, like living entities, so are robots. There we can call them white robots. Here they exercise this control. In this regard, the researchers say, do not despair and think that there are no brothers in mind, or they do not want to communicate with us. Clues in the form of pyramids, crystal skulls, and other equally strange artifacts are scattered all over the planet. If humanity had been deliberately placed in isolation by someone, none of this would ever have been found and made public. The number remains, just no one is ready to call it.